When he came to office, the pandemic was raging, the economy was reeling, and American democracy was under attack. Then Joe Biden went to work.
I think we should just need younger leadership in general.
We will not pass the debt ceiling that just raises it without doing something about our debt.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns here in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We begin tonight with brand new CBS polling about the Republican Party presidential field, giving us a better idea of what Republican voters think about former President Trump. He leads a potential 2024 field by healthy margins, with 58% of likely Republican primary voters saying they'll vote for him. And even more Republicans say they're at least considering Trump, even if they're not supporting him right now. So for more on this, CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now to break this all down. Hi, Anthony. Great to see you here with this new poll. I want to get your sense on this early stage. What do primary voters say that they want in a candidate?
Hey there, Caitlin, everybody. Now, before people can decide something, your question's right on. You have to ask them, what do they want? And when we do that, you get a list of issues and items that sound very much like they're right out of the MAGA playbook. You get the desire for a candidate that challenges woke ideas. Here's one. 6 in 10 say they want a candidate who says that Trump won in 2020. Of course, he says that. And for good measure, a majority want a candidate that just plain makes liberals angry. And then in each of these categories and then some, their answer for how they get it is vote for Donald Trump. Now, some of this, Caitlin, I should add, is a picture of a party that still likes the president just as much as they did when he left office, because almost 9 in 10 say it's his past performance. That's a big reason. But I do want to highlight this, because you look at his recent legal troubles, and has that dissuaded anybody? Well, there's 2/3 that say that one reason for supporting him now is to show support for him in those legal fights. So it's kind of reciprocal in that vein. They think he's fighting for them, and they're doing this a little bit to show support for him.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how long that lasts, this coalescing around Trump in the face of these legal investigations. But you also say that there's some Trump fatigue out there. What exactly is that? And does that kind of create an opening for other candidates, maybe?
Yeah, see, that's a great question, because you see about a quarter of the GOP electorate. Now, they're outnumbered, but when you ask them how Donald Trump makes them feel, their top answer is exhausted. And they also voice concern that he's, quote, too controversial. Now, they're outnumbered at this point, but yes, maybe that becomes an opening for other candidates. And let me show you this final slide. If you break down that primary field this way, there's a bit of a floor under Trump. There's a quarter who say they're only considering him. There's that about a quarter I mentioned who say they're not considering him. But then there's this middle, this 40% who are considering Trump, but also other candidates. And as we go forward, I think that's the area to watch if there is any movement.
Yeah, still a long way to go, but this gives us interesting insight as to how voters are thinking about their party. Anthony Salvanto, as always, we thank you.
Thank you.
So for more on all of this, let's bring in Ed OKeefe and Robert Costa. Ed OKeefe is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent, and Robert is CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Great to see you here, both of you, for our first episode of America Decides. I want to pick your brains a little bit, because I know we've all been out on the campaign trail covering these early stages of the campaign. But Bob, Anthony picked up on a really interesting nugget in our poll, which, you do have a quarter of Republican voters who say that they aren't considering Trump. And you would think that that could create an opening for these other candidates, but we're still seeing some reluctance on the part of some Republicans to really say anything negative about Trump and get into the race. I mean, it looks like a small field so far. I'm wondering what you make of that. I mean, we do still have a while to go.
This poll indicates that we're at a crossroads in the Republican presidential race. Some candidates are looking at Trump's ascendance and their own priorities and saying no thanks. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin today, speaking in California, said his focus remains on these off-year elections in Virginia. But you have someone like Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina moving closer to an announcement this month. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis just took a trip abroad. He continues to make moves toward his own presidential run. There's a belief in other camps within the Republican Party that Trump is gaining strength at this moment inside the race, but the race remains early.
And Ed, from where you sit covering this White House, covering the re-election campaign of Biden, if they see a poll like this, are they planning on running against Donald Trump? What would they take away from this poll?
I mean, that's the default setting right now, certainly for the White House. And you've seen that in the opening week of Biden 2024, just this focus on restoring democracy or extreme Republicans. And you see a lot of imagery of him, of certain lawmakers who are supportive of former President Trump. The idea being, yes, for now, it looks like a rematch. Their sort of backstop on that is even if it isn't a rematch, they all certainly think like him or say they would govern like him. And I think this poll reinforces that. If they're looking for somebody who denies reality in terms of the 2020 election, fights the woke thought, that has been a big rallying cry of DeSantis especially and some others who've been out there talking about this next campaign cycle. It is in essence, if not the candidate, then certainly ideology that's been crafted by him. And so they sit there, they're going to see this afternoon and go, see, this is exactly why the strategy we've adopted so far should continue, because clearly Republicans are still, if not completely with him, certainly heavily influenced by him.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of Republicans want to be drawing this contrast with Biden and not with each other. I mean, Bob, I thought it was interesting last week how President Trump did start to go after Biden heavily in New Hampshire. That was kind of a turn from him because he's been focused a lot about, his own grievances about this investigation. But do you sense a concern within the Republican Party about kind of where they are going in terms of the nominee? Or is there a feeling that there's still a lot of time to go before they really have to start figuring out a way to not have Donald Trump as the nominee?
When you look at the CBS News poll, it's evident that so many quarters within the Republican Party, so many voters are still with that Trump vein of ideology, and they're not moving away from it. There are those within the Republican Party, like former Vice President Mike Pence, who sat down with CBS News last week, who would like to see it return to a more traditional conservative message on many policies. And he might decide to run, to put that forward as a platform to say we can go back to movement conservatism, traditional Republican ideas. But that's going to be like changing a major cruise ship in mid-course. This Republican Party has been moving along the Trump trail, the Trump path for so long. To bring it back to kind of that Reaganite position on foreign policy and trade and other issues will take quite a lot of political capital and persuasion. And that's why so many people believe it's an uphill climb.
But look at those numbers. What did it say? 25% with Trump, about 25% totally opposed to him, and 49% in the middle. You take 49% plus 24%, that beats 25%. So the math is still there. Somebody could do
the math's there, but who's the candidate?
Exactly.
Who's
that's
going
what we're waiting to
happen?
see. And that's what's so challenging, is turning that cruise ship is going to take several months probably, if not most of the next year. And who has the name recognition, the money, the ability to do that against a former president who just has astronomical name ID and loyalty certainly built in.
Well, and speaking of that loyalty, what stuck out to me, too, is that Republican primary voters don't want these other candidates attacking Trump. And that's why we really haven't seen the gloves come off. Yes, we see some of them going after each other, trying to kind of vie for the alternative. I mean, one line of attack that Republican Nikki Haley is waging against this president and against former President Trump, too, is this age factor. It's a question that we've been asking Republican candidates. I want to play a little bit of some of our conversations, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
My problems with President Biden are the failures of his policies at home and abroad. I think this administration has weakened America's place in the world.
I think that he has been a poor leader for America. The question to me, is it physical or mental? I think he has just not been a very good president.
So you have those Republicans really not wanting to engage on this issue of age, but others like Haley, I mentioned, really taking it head on. How is the Biden team dealing with all of this? I mean, he often says, watch me, but age is a significant factor.
It is. One way he's dealing with it now is humor. We saw it most notably now over the weekend at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. But even before that, there were events last week at the White House where he was making references to something like Dwight Eisenhower had done. And he said, despite what the media might tell you, I was not there. I am not a friend of his. Being somewhat more self-aware. It's cute. It makes us laugh. But I wonder how that helps or hurts him. And does it not reinforce what some have said, which is like, they may like the guy, they may like what he's done, but they just worry he's going to die in office. And Nikki Haley going there in the last week and saying that's what's going to happen.
And the question
is, an 86-year-old die,
Does Nikki Haley not only go there with Biden, with the president, but does she go there with Trump on the debate stage? We're at this pre-debate moment in the Republican race where these could be breakout moments for someone like Vivek Ramaswamy to say, if he has a young, youthful appearance on stage and navigates the Trump question pretty expertly, he could have a moment. It reminds me of how Pete Buttigieg had a breakout moment back in the 2020 race for how he handled these kind of national televised forums. But for now, they're all just taking these shots at Trump through ads, through their own stops. Will they do it to his face on a debate stage? Of course, that means Trump has to show up at the debates, which isn't necessarily guaranteed.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And on the age factor, I mean, we did polling back in August that showed, something of 73% of voters said that they would like an age limit for politicians. So there is some appetite there. What's interesting to me, too, is that you're seeing Republicans really focus on Kamala Harris in light of this. You mentioned that Nikki Haley suggested that Biden may not live out his term if reelected. Is the White House, how are Biden folks kind of feeling about Kamala Harris now? I mean, she's going to be in the spotlight for that reason.
She is. And it was striking to talk to people who were at the events that the DNC and the Biden reelect held Friday and Saturday for essentially their top donors, people that are going to raise the most money for them. How unsolicited, a few of them I spoke to said, and by the way, the vice president was just wonderful. She went table to table. She, shook everybody's hand. She took selfies. She said, I love you. She said, call anytime, which is something she had not done 4 years ago, something she wasn't known to do when she was running for the Senate, but something she now understands she has to do. Okay, so you've scratched the backs of the people most critical to a campaign's bankroll, at least. Now the question is, how do you send her out publicly? The plan is apparently in the works to get her out there more often, keep her talking about abortion rights and other issues that are important to the Democratic base. But they're going to have to address this problem. It keeps coming up. And Haley's attack is a good example of it.
She's been on the road talking about abortion rights. I mean, she seems to be arriving right now at her political sweet spot. How did she gain national prominence? She's in the Senate, and she's really questioning Supreme Court nominees on the accountability question when they get nominated for the Supreme Court. So court accountability, Supreme Court accountability. That was her issue that helped her when she ran for president. She didn't win the nomination, but that got her in the conversation in a big way, maybe even helped her get on the national ticket. Now she's back to the same theme, Supreme Court accountability, coupled with abortion rights, which is in that same ballpark. And so you see her now finding that zone, and she's comfortable in that zone. When you watch her on the trail, so yes, she's talking to donors more. That's really interesting reporting. She's giving them more of a touch behind the scenes. But when it comes to her rhetoric, this is where she likes to be. She's not wandering off into some fresh area where she may get challenged. She knows these issues.
Kind of.
And you reestablish credibility with the base, worry about swing voters after that. Still a long time until November 2024. But they see these attacks coming from Haley and others, and they definitely know it's a weak spot.
Yeah, she'll be in the spotlight for a variety of reasons for that. Bob and Ed, great to have you both with us. And I know that you will be anchoring later this week, both of you. Bob on Thursday and Ed tomorrow, right here. So join us again, and we'll see you then. House Speaker McCarthy and the House GOP have rallied around a plan to raise the debt ceiling. Can they find common ground with the White House on anything? We'll look at that next. You're streaming America Decides. Congressional Democrats are divided after the House Republican Party narrowly passed legislation to raise the U.S. debt ceiling last week. Lawmakers are now raising concerns that the proposal could cut veterans programs and benefits. Scott McFarland has the latest from Capitol Hill.
The Senate Budget Committee will have a hearing Thursday in which Democrats are expected to blast the recently passed U.S. House debt ceiling bill. They're calling to testify an economist, an environmentalist, a renewable energy expert as well. There are no veterans groups listed yet. That's noteworthy because as Monday progressed, the issue of veterans benefits and veterans medical care became a volatile wedge issue in this debt ceiling standoff. The Biden administration, through the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and Democrats in Congress, accused Republicans of allowing veteran services to be cut, medical care access to be reduced, benefits to be delayed through the bill that passed in the U.S. House. As Monday progressed, Republicans pushed back, saying that's untrue and that veterans' benefits and care will be preserved. But that's where we are with just weeks until the deadline. Both sides just digging in deeper, including with a hearing in the Senate Thursday morning. Caitlin?
All right, Scott McFarland on Capitol Hill, thank you. For more on this, I'm going to bring in Ed and Bob because we have some breaking news on a couple of fronts. First, we have the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, saying that by early June, they're not going to be able to pay their bills as early as June 1st. So that's kind of the deadline for the debt ceiling that we're looking at right now. The president has called Speaker Kevin McCarthy, asking him to meet about the debt limit deadline, and that he's also going to be calling other congressional leaders. He's, of course, in Jerusalem right now, Kevin McCarthy is. But, Ed, I mean, this has been the big question that we had going into today was now that the House passed a bill saying, look, we've done our job. We want to meet with you, Mr. President. There were all these questions about whether he would. The White House has been pretty dug in, saying they're not negotiating on anything except a clean debt limit increase.
Right.
What do you make of this new reporting that has literally just come out?
And we're working, there will be more on this shortly, I'm told, by somebody at the White House.
Real-time reporting right there on your phone.
It's not surprising that the president is now willing to at least start talking about having another meeting, as pedantic as that may seem. Because what had he been saying? Show me your budget, I'll show you mine, and then we can talk. So in essence, by passing that debt limit increase, which is going nowhere in the Senate, they have put their cards on the table and said, this is what we would do. The president has put forward his budget plan, which he would argue is also separate from the debt limit bill regardless. So in essence, they can start having a conversation now this far apart to try to get to here, according to the Treasury Department now, by June 1. There is expected to be another influx of money come around mid-June from a lot of corporate tax payments that are expected. The other issue I've been told in recent days is, a big chunk of the country doesn't have to pay their taxes by last month because of disasters. There have been extensions put in place for parts of Florida and California, so there's not much revenue coming in. But there had been a lot of questions about how long is this going to take. So now, with a month to go, at least in the eyes of the Treasury Secretary, and only House and Senate in town for a few of those weeks, time to start having those meetings and seeing what exactly can be done. But he was also facing pressure from House Democrats especially, who said, now that we're on the record, we voted no for it, but the Republicans have done what you asked. It's time to have this meeting, and we'll see exactly how quickly it might happen.
And the big question facing the whole White House and the Republican leadership is, what are they going to do here? The White House wants a clean debt limit extension. The House Republicans want spending cuts or some kind of pledge on spending reductions budgetarily put forward. At this point, it's just a question of who's going to blink. Right. Can they come up with some kind of compromise where it doesn't look like it's a tax increase or a spending increase, but the White House is giving some concession on maybe spending levels and how they're going to transition over the next decade or 2 decades? This is really going to be an inside game of whether someone like Gene Sperling can talk to Brian Fitzpatrick, the congressman from Pennsylvania, the co-chair of the Problem Solvers, who can then talk to Kevin McCarthy, who can then talk to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and try to see, is there a coalition of conservatives, enough conservatives so it doesn't seem like McCarthy's selling out politically? Are there enough moderates in both parties to give this consensus agreement, should there be one, a path forward? Because it's not going to ever end up clean unless a lot of moderates come along. And maybe they do it if there's a deadline and there's no deal. The White House may be banking on the moderates saying, we're going to go with the Democrats. But ultimately, McCarthy would like to see some conservative buy-in. I'm really curious, what's the real White House line on how far they're willing to go?
Right. Well, and look, if it's clean debt limit, but then we'll have a conversation about the budget, President probably wouldn't have an issue with cutting a budget deal now ahead of September.
So do pass the debt limit extension, but then make a deal on the budget. Yeah, that could happen.
And he's open to that.
As you both note, though, the calendar is really shrinking. Of course, we just have a month to go, and Congress is not here. So we'll talk to you guys more about that coming up. We will actually talk to a Republican House member about this impasse. Florida Republican Congressman Byron Donalds joins us after the break. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Florida Representative Byron Donalds joins me now from Naples. Hi, Congressman. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. We are actually getting some breaking news that President Biden has called congressional leaders and is setting up a meeting to talk about the debt ceiling. You are a member of the House Republican Conference. Republicans in the House passed a debt limit bill last week that includes lots of other provisions as well. When it comes to negotiating, is there anything in those items that were included in that bill that passed that you would be willing to negotiate away?
No, frankly, because our spending has gotten to a place where it's unsustainable, and we got to get back to pre-pandemic spending levels. Listen, when the pandemic started and the federal government ratcheted up spending because the economy was shut down, there was a point to be made that we needed to step in and do what needed to be done so the American people weren't harmed in the process because of the scourge coming from the Wuhan lab in China. But now that the pandemic is over, it's time to go back to pre-COVID spending levels. This is common sense stuff. Any business, any family would do the same. The president of the United States needs to see the reality, see the writing on the wall, and do the right thing.
Congressman, it also, though, included rolling back parts of the Inflation Reduction Act, having work requirements for government programs, cutting the student loan forgiveness program, in addition to those spending cuts. Any of those items, are any of those negotiable?
Well, listen, first of all, the student loan debacle that Joe Biden created is unconstitutional. Congress never passed that. He did it with a pen, all by himself. Even Nancy Pelosi said he didn't have the authority to do it, but he did it anyway. That is unconstitutional. It's in violation of the law. The law never allows that. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to the other provisions, like let's take the Inflation Reduction Act that didn't reduce inflation at all. It's only going to make matters worse. In there are $1.2 trillion in subsidies for these Green New Deal companies that are going to make billions of dollars while we're spending money we don't have. If you want to have a clean energy program, a clean energy apparatus, let all of our energies compete, especially when solar panels and wind turbines are actually less green than things like nuclear and natural gas.
Congressman, you were also, as our viewers remember, when we were watching the fight over McCarthy speakership, you were very critical of him at the time and withheld your vote, eventually gave it to him. But if he negotiates any of these items away, will he be out of a job?
Look, I'm not going to go that far. Kevin McCarthy is going to go in and do his job on behalf of the House of Representatives and the American people. He's going to negotiate and try to get to a place where there's a pathway to raising the debt ceiling. But let's be very clear. Joe Biden has to take this seriously. This is about Joe Biden way more than it's about Kevin McCarthy. Joe Biden is the one that has spent recklessly. Joe Biden is the one that unleashed this inflation on the American people, where prices are up overall 30-40% on the American consumer. That's very devastating to all families. So he needs to step up and he needs to do the right thing.
And Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that we have until early June to get this sorted out. Congress is not in session right now. Are you confident that the U.S. will not default? Would you be okay with a default?
Oh, yeah. No. I'm very confident that we're not going to default. I think cooler heads are going to prevail. I think common sense is going to reign in Washington. And let's be very clear. Joe Biden's position in his own budget for spending $7 trillion next year is outrageous and obscene. We only raised $4.5 trillion in taxes. He wants to spend $7 trillion. So I would ask you and your viewers, who's more responsible? It is clearly House Republicans. We need to get back to pre-COVID spending. That is what 75% of the American people actually want. And then we can actually go through the other processes of finding ways to further curtail our debt so the American people can thrive.
All right, Byron Donalds, Congressman from Florida, we appreciate your time, and we will follow this as the two sides appear to finally be talking. And that does it for us today. You can stream America Decides Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.